Listen, I need to tell you something about humans that nobody in the Galactic Council wants to admit. They are absolutely, completely, utterly insane. And I mean that in the most respectful way possible, considering one of them just saved my entire species from extinction. But we will get to that part later. My name is Vex, and I am what your kind would call a predator, not the movie kind with thermal vision and shoulder cannons, mind you. I am a Korath, which means I have 6 limbs, retractable claws, and enough bite force to crush a steel beam. We are the enforcers of the galaxy, the ones who handle situations when diplomacy fails spectacularly, which, let me tell you, happens more often than anyone cares to admit. The problem started 3 cycles ago when the Council decided to establish first contact with Earth. Standard protocol, nothing fancy. Send in the diplomats, exchange pleasantries, maybe trade some technology for resources. Simple, right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. The human they assigned to me was named Jake Miller, not some fancy title or ceremonial name, just Jake Miller. The guy who apparently fixed air conditioning units for a living before getting randomly selected for the most important job in human history. The irony was not lost on me, though I am pretty sure it was lost on everyone else in the council chambers. Now, here is where things get interesting. Council regulations state very clearly that predator-class beings cannot have direct contact with newly contacted species without proper psychological evaluation and approval. The paperwork alone takes approximately 47 standard days. I know because I counted. Twice. But Jake Miller was not following the script. While our diplomatic team was busy discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges in the main conference hall, this human was sitting in his assigned quarters, staring at the wall that separated his room from mine, not reading the information packets, not reviewing the cultural briefings, just staring at a wall for 6 hours straight. My enhanced hearing picked up something the diplomatic team missed entirely. Jake was humming. A soft, repetitive melody that seemed to have no pattern whatsoever. But every few minutes he would pause, tap the wall 3 times, and then continue humming. This is when I made my first mistake. I tapped back. The humming stopped immediately. Complete silence for exactly 37 seconds. Then, 3 more taps. I responded with 3 taps of my own. What followed was the most ridiculous conversation in galactic history, conducted entirely through wall tapping. 3 taps meant hello. 4 taps meant yes. 2 taps meant no. 1 tap meant I do not understand. 5 taps meant something funny. Because it always made Jake laugh, and his laughter was, well, it was infectious. Even through 6 inches of reinforced titanium composite. The diplomatic team had no idea this was happening. They were too busy arguing about mineral rights and atmospheric requirements to notice that their human representative was having deep philosophical discussions with a Korath warrior using nothing but knuckle-to-wall percussion. By day 3, our conversations had become incredibly sophisticated. We had developed an entire number system, basic emotional expressions, and what I can only describe as the galactic equivalent of knock-knock jokes. Jake was apparently very good at those. That is when I learned something that changed everything I thought I knew about humans. Jake Miller was terrified. Not of me, specifically. Not of the situation. He was terrified of failing. This random air conditioning repair technician had somehow convinced himself that the entire future of human galactic relations depended on him not screwing up. The pressure was literally killing him. I could smell the stress hormones seeping through the wall. So I made my second mistake. I decided to help. The thing about Korath anatomy is that our claws are not just weapons. They are precision tools, capable of cutting through almost any material with surgical accuracy. The wall between Jake and me was designed to withstand explosive decompression, plasma weapons, and pretty much anything else you could throw at it. It was not designed to withstand a determined Korath with too much time on his hands and a growing concern for a stressed human. I started small. Just tiny scratches, barely visible to the naked eye, testing the material, learning its composition, then slightly larger marks, still within the range of normal wear and tear. The maintenance drones would scan the walls daily but never flagged anything unusual. It took me exactly 11 days to create a hole just large enough for visual contact. When Jake first saw my eye looking through that tiny opening, his reaction was, well, it was not what I expected. He did not scream. He did not call for security. He did not even seem particularly surprised. He just said, "Well, hello there. I was wondering when you would get tired of just talking through walls." His voice was different from what I had imagined during our tapping conversations, warmer somehow, more real, and he was smiling, which is apparently something humans do when they are happy or amused, rather than preparing to attack. "You are not supposed to be here," I whispered through the hole, though I made no move to leave. "Neither are you, I am guessing," Jake replied, settling cross-legged on the floor directly in front of the wall, "but here we are anyway." That is when I learned the most important thing about humans. They have this incredible ability to find common ground in the most impossible situations. Jake was not talking to a Korath warrior or a Predator class enforcer. He was just talking to someone who had been listening to him tap on walls for 2 weeks straight. "They think I am going to mess this up," he continued, not really looking at me but somehow including me in the conversation anyway. "First contact with an entire galactic civilization, and they send the guy who usually just fixes broken thermostats." I could have told him about the extensive psychological profiling that went into his selection, about the millions of data points that identified him as the perfect human representative, about how his calm demeanor and practical problem-solving skills made him ideal for this situation. Instead, I said, "Well, you have managed to train a Korath warrior to sit by a wall and tap out musical compositions. That has to count for something." Jake laughed. Actually laughed. And I realized that somehow, without either of us meaning for it to happen, we had become friends. That is, when everything went sideways. The emergency alarm started wailing at exactly 0347 hours ship time, not the gentle chimes that indicated meal times or scheduled meetings. The bone-rattling, gut-wrenching wail that meant imminent catastrophic danger. Jake was on his feet immediately, pressing his face to the tiny hole in the wall. "What is that?" he asked, and I could hear the fear in his voice. I was already moving, my enhanced senses picking up the subtle vibrations that indicated the ship was changing course rapidly. Too rapidly for normal operations. This was an emergency maneuver. "Something is wrong," I told him, though that was probably obvious from the sirens. "Stay here. Do not leave your quarters no matter what happens." "Wait, where are you going?" Jake called after me, but I was already headed for the door. I had to make a choice. Follow a protocol and report to my designated station, or break approximately 17 different regulations and find out what was threatening the ship that carried the most important human in galactic history. I chose option 3, break 18 regulations by hacking into the ship's internal communication system. What I found in the data streams made my blood run cold. 3 Hegemony destroyer-class vessels had appeared at the edge of the system and were moving toward us at attack speed. The Hegemony, for those lucky enough to never have encountered them, are basically the galactic equivalent of space pirates with delusions of grandeur and really big guns. They had somehow learned about the first contact mission and decided that capturing a human representative would be far more valuable than allowing the Council to complete peaceful negotiations. The diplomatic team was in full panic mode. Emergency protocols were being implemented. The ship was preparing for immediate departure to Council space, which would mean abandoning the first contact mission entirely. And Jake Miller, the air conditioning repair guy who was supposed to save human galactic relations, was sitting in a locked room with no idea that his entire species' future was about to be decided by a space battle. I made my third mistake. I went back to his quarters. "Jake," I called through the hole in the wall, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." He was there immediately, pressing his ear to the opening. "What is happening out there?" "The Hegemony found us. 3 warships, moving to attack. The diplomatic team is preparing to evacuate." There was a long pause. Then Jake said something that perfectly encapsulated why humans are simultaneously the most frustrating and most admirable species in the galaxy. "Well, that is inconvenient." Inconvenient. A space battle that could determine the fate of his entire civilization, and Jake Miller called it inconvenient. Like a broken air conditioner on a hot day. "Jake, they are going to abort the mission. Take you back to Council space for your safety. First contact will be postponed indefinitely, possibly permanently." Another pause. "And that is bad?" "Yes, that is bad. Your species has been waiting for this moment for generations. This is your chance to join the galactic community. to access technologies and knowledge beyond your wildest imagination. If this fails, it could be centuries before another opportunity arises. I could hear him thinking, which sounds ridiculous. But humans have this way of being quiet that is different from other species. It is active silence, if that makes any sense. Finally, Jake said, "What do you think I should do?" And that is when I realized something that terrified me more than any Hegemony warship. This human was asking a Korath predator for advice on the most important decision in human history. And somehow, that felt completely natural. "Honestly," I said, "I think you should do what you do best. Fix broken air conditioners, fix broken situations." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "How long do we have before they arrive?" I checked the tactical display through my neural link, approximately 47 minutes. "And how long would it take for you to make this hole big enough for me to get through?" I stared at him through the opening. "Jake, that is against every regulation in the book. I could be court-martialed. You could be killed, and even if we somehow survived, both our governments would probably disavow any knowledge of our existence." Jake smiled that strange human smile again. "So, about 20 minutes then?" That is when I understood why the psychological profiles had selected Jake Miller for this mission. Not because he was cautious or diplomatic or politically sophisticated, because when faced with an impossible situation, his first instinct was not to run or hide or wait for someone else to fix it. His first instinct was to grab his tools and get to work. I had been enlarging the hole in small increments over 11 days, carefully removing tiny fragments to avoid detection. Now I had 20 minutes to create an opening large enough for a full-grown human to squeeze through without bringing half the wall down on top of us. Fortunately, precision demolition is exactly the kind of problem Korath claws were designed to solve. The sound was terrible. Metal screaming as molecular bonds separated under focused pressure, composite materials splitting along stress lines that had never been meant to bear this kind of force. Every cut sent vibrations through the ship's hull that I was certain would trigger every security system on board. But the alarms were still wailing from the Hegemony threat. And the emergency protocols meant that most automated systems were focused on external dangers rather than internal modifications to living quarters. 18 minutes later, I had created a gap just barely wide enough for Jake to crawl through. He did not hesitate. The moment the opening was large enough, he was pushing himself through the jagged metal edges with the kind of determined efficiency that probably served him well in tight crawl spaces behind broken HVAC units. When he finally stood up in my quarters, I got my first full look at the human who had somehow convinced me to commit multiple felonies. Jake Miller was not impressive by Galactic standards. Average height, average build, wearing the standard issue jumpsuit that all diplomatic guests received. But his eyes were bright with something that I had never seen in any species before. Not just intelligence or determination, but a kind of practical optimism that somehow made impossible problems seem merely difficult. "Okay," he said, brushing metal shavings off his sleeves. "What do we do now?" Before I could answer, the ship lurched sideways as the first Hegemony plasma bolt struck our shields. The battle for Earth's future had begun. The second plasma bolt hit harder than the first, and I watched Jake grab the nearest bulkhead to keep from falling over. His face had gone pale, but his expression remained frustratingly calm, like he was diagnosing a particularly stubborn compressor malfunction, instead of facing imminent death by space pirates. "Right," he said, steadying himself as the ship shuddered again. "So those are the bad guys, I assume?" The Hegemony does not really do good guy activities, no. I was already moving toward my weapons locker, muscle memory taking over. "Jake, you need to get back to your quarters. The diplomatic team will be looking for you soon, and if they find you here with me." "They will what?" "Court-martial both of us," Jake interrupted, following me across the room, despite my very reasonable suggestion that he hide. "Seems like that ship has already sailed, or been blown up by space pirates, one of the two." The man had a point, which was annoying because I was trying to save his life and he was making it unnecessarily difficult. Typical human behavior, really. My weapons locker contained enough firepower to level a small building, but it was all designed for close-quarters combat. The kind of situation where you board an enemy vessel and work your way through corridors full of hostile targets. None of it would be particularly useful against 3 destroyer-class ships attacking from space. Vex, Jake said, and something in his tone made me turn around. What exactly does the diplomatic team plan to do about this? I paused in my weapon selection. Standard evacuation protocol, jump to hyperspace. Retreat to council space. File a formal complaint through proper channels. And then? And then the council spends approximately 6 months debating the appropriate response while the Hegemony uses you as leverage to extract concessions from Earth. Jake nodded thoughtfully, like I had just explained why his air conditioning unit was making strange noises. That seems inefficient. It is the established protocol for. No, I mean really inefficient. Jake was looking around my quarters now, taking in the tactical displays, the weapon systems, the communication arrays. How many Korath are on this ship? Just me. Why? And how many crew members total? 47, not counting the diplomatic team. Jake, where are you going with this? But he was not listening to me anymore. He was studying the hole we had created in the wall, running his fingers along the cut edges with the focused attention of someone solving a technical problem. This metal, he said. How thick is it throughout the ship? Standard bulkhead plating is approximately 6 inches of titanium composite, double-layered with shock-absorbing foam cores. But I was answering automatically while trying to figure out what this human was thinking. Internal wall sections are thinner, approximately 3 inches, same material composition. Jake was quiet for almost 30 seconds, which in the middle of a space battle felt like several lifetimes. Then he looked up at me with that strange human expression that I was beginning to recognize as an idea forming. Vex, do you trust me? That was possibly the most loaded question in galactic history. Trust a human I had known for 2 weeks? Trust someone who fixed air conditioners for a living to handle a military crisis? Trust a member of a species that had not even achieved interstellar travel to solve a problem that had the entire Galactic Council stumped? Yes, I said, because apparently I had lost my mind completely. Good. I need you to contact the Hegemony ships. I stared at him. Jake, that is surrender. The moment we open communication channels, they will demand. I know what they will demand. Jake was already moving toward the communication console, studying the controls with the same methodical approach he had used on the wall. They want me, right? The human representative? Yes, but then let me talk to them. This was insane. This was beyond insane. This was the kind of decision that would get me stripped of rank and possibly executed for treason. The Council had very specific protocols for handling hostage situations, and let the untrained alien negotiate directly with space pirates was not one of them. But something about Jake's tone stopped me from refusing immediately. He was not panicking. He was not grandstanding. He sounded like someone who had identified the problem and was ready to implement a solution. What do you plan to say to them? I asked. The truth, Jake replied, which was somehow both the most and least helpful answer possible. The ship lurched again, harder this time, and I could hear the emergency klaxons changing pitch. That meant shield failure was imminent. We had maybe 10 minutes before the Hegemony stopped playing with us and started doing serious damage. I made what was probably my 4th major mistake of the day. I opened a communication channel to the lead Hegemony vessel. The face that appeared on the screen was exactly what you would expect from a space pirate, scarred, augmented with military-grade cybernetics, and wearing an expression that suggested violence was not just his profession but his hobby. Council ship, the Hegemony captain said, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that comes from years of practice. You will surrender the human representative immediately, or we will take him from your wreckage. Jake stepped into view of the camera before I could stop him. Hello, he said, with the same tone he might use to greet a customer whose air conditioning had broken down in the middle of summer. I am Jake Miller. I understand you want to talk to me. The Hegemony captain blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct response. Human, you will prepare for immediate transport to our vessel. Any resistance will result in the destruction of your ship and all aboard. Right, Jake said. Before we get to that, can I ask you a question? I wanted to grab Jake and pull him away from the screen, but something about his posture stopped me. He was leaning forward slightly, hands clasped behind his back, looking genuinely curious rather than terrified. It was the body language of someone starting a professional consultation. The Hegemony captain looked confused, which was probably not an expression he wore very often. What? How long have your ships been running? What kind of question is that? A practical one. Jake was studying something off-screen, probably the tactical display showing the Hegemony vessels. Those are Mark 7 plasma drive systems, right? Probably pushing about 15 years of service time, judging by the exhaust patterns. I looked at the tactical readouts. Jake was right, though I had no idea how he could possibly know that just from looking at sensor data. Your ship configurations are impressive, Jake continued, still maintaining that conversational tone. But I am betting your environmental systems are running hot, probably cycling atmospheric processors every 6 hours instead of the standard 12. And your weapon systems, well, they pack a punch, but the power consumption must be brutal. How often do you have to drop out of hyperspace for maintenance? The Hegemony captain was staring at Jake like he had started speaking in ancient mathematical formulas. How could you possibly? I fix things for a living, Jake said simply, and I can tell when something is about to break. That was when I understood what Jake was doing. He was not negotiating or stalling for time. He was conducting a professional assessment. Your lead ship has a coolant leak in the primary plasma conduit, Jake continued, pointing at something on the tactical display that I could not see. Probably started as a minor drip about 6 months ago. But the pressure differential has been getting worse. Your engineers have been compensating by running the secondary systems harder. But that is just putting more strain on components that were not designed for continuous overload operation. The Hegemony captain's scarred face had gone very still. Impossible. Our systems are failing, Jake finished. Your second ship has similar problems with the atmospheric recycling systems. Too many people, not enough processing capacity, and somebody probably jury-rigged a bypass that worked fine for a few months but is now causing cascade failures throughout the life support network. I checked the sensor readings more carefully. Jake was right. The energy signatures from the Hegemony vessels showed exactly the kind of irregularities he was describing. And your third ship, Jake said, almost conversationally. Well, that one is interesting. Somebody has been making modifications to the weapon systems without upgrading the power distribution network. Probably gives you about 20% more firepower. But I would bet good money that you can only maintain maximum output for about 4 minutes before you start blowing circuit breakers. The silence on the communication channel stretched for nearly 15 seconds. Then the Hegemony captain said, very quietly, "What do you want?" Jake smiled. "I want to help." Help? You are pirates, right? Your whole business model depends on having ships that work. But you have been operating in the outer systems for years without access to proper maintenance facilities. You make do with salvaged parts and improvised repairs, but the truth is, your ships are falling apart faster than you can fix them. Another pause. Continue. I am offering you a trade, Jake said. You let this diplomatic mission proceed, you leave Council space, and I give you the technical specifications for upgraded environmental systems, more efficient plasma conduits, and power distribution networks that can actually handle your weapon modifications. I stared at Jake. This was either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. Yeah. Why would you help us? The Hegemony captain asked. Because it solves everyone's problem, Jake replied. You get ships that actually work properly. The Council gets peaceful first contact with Earth, and I get to go home knowing I did not accidentally start an interstellar war. You would give military technology to enemies of the Council? Jake shrugged. I am giving maintenance manuals to people who need them. What you do with properly functioning life support systems is your business. The Hegemony captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Prove it. Excuse me? Prove you can do what you claim. Fix something. Jake looked around my quarters, then walked over to the environmental control panel. He pulled out what looked like a standard repair kit, except I had no idea where he had gotten it from. Vex, he said, not looking up from the panel. Your atmospheric recycling system has been running about 12% above optimal efficiency for the past month. Probably because someone recalibrated the filters after that power surge we had during the hyperspace jump. Minor issue. But it is putting unnecessary strain on the whole system. I had not even noticed there was a problem. But when I checked the diagnostic readings, he was right. Jake worked for exactly 4 minutes. making adjustments that looked impossibly delicate with tools that seemed far too crude for the job. Then the environmental control panel beeped softly, and suddenly the air in my quarters felt different, cleaner somehow. More comfortable. There, Jake said, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. 12% efficiency improvement, reduced wear on the primary filters, and you should see about a 3% reduction in power consumption. He looked directly into the communication camera. Imagine what I could do with 6 hours and access to your actual engineering systems. The Hegemony captain was staring at the screen with something approaching awe. You fixed their life support during an active battle situation. I fix things, Jake said again. It is what I do. The pause this time lasted almost a full minute. Then the Hegemony captain said, "We will withdraw to safe distance. You have 1 hour to transmit the technical specifications." The communication channel closed. I looked at Jake, who was calmly putting his tools away like he had just finished a routine service call. "Jake," I said carefully, "do you actually have upgraded technical specifications to give them?" "Not yet," he replied. "But I have an hour to write them up based on the diagnostic data from their ships. And you think you can actually improve their systems?" Jake looked at me with that strange human expression again. The one that suggested I had just asked whether water was wet. Vex. Those ships are held together with spare parts and wishful thinking. A first-year engineering student could improve their efficiency by 30% just by replacing the components that are obviously failing. He was right, of course. But that was not the point. Jake, what you just did, that was not diplomacy, that was not negotiation. That was problem solving. Jake finished. Same thing I do every day, just with bigger air conditioners. The emergency klaxons stopped wailing. The ship's motion stabilized as our pilots ceased evasive maneuvers. Through the tactical display, I could see the Hegemony vessels moving to a safer distance, their weapon systems powering down to standby mode. Jake Miller, air conditioning repair technician from Earth, had just ended a potentially catastrophic military confrontation by offering to help space pirates fix their plumbing. And somehow, it had worked. "The diplomatic team is going to want a full report," I said, though I was not sure how I would even begin to explain what had happened. "Probably," Jake agreed. "But first I need to write up some maintenance manuals. Think you could help me access the technical databases?" I looked at this human who had convinced me to commit multiple felonies, break approximately 20 different regulations, and participate in unauthorized negotiations with enemy combatants. This person who had somehow turned a crisis that could have started an interstellar war into a routine service call. "Yes," I said. "I think I can manage that." As it turned out, humans are not insane. They are just practical in ways that no other species has ever considered. When faced with an impossible situation, they do not look for complex political solutions or military strategies or diplomatic compromises. They just figure out what is broken and fix it. And sometimes, that is exactly what the galaxy needs. 6 months later, Hegemony raids in Council space dropped by 73%, not because of military intervention or diplomatic pressure, but because their ships finally worked properly, and they could spend more time in productive activities instead of constantly repairing critical systems. Jake Miller returned to Earth as the most successful first contact representative in galactic history. The Council offered him any position he wanted, access to any technology, any resources he might need. He asked for an updated toolkit and a promotion to senior maintenance engineer. As for me, I was court-martialed exactly as expected. The charges included unauthorized modification of diplomatic facilities, breach of contact protocols, failure to report security violations, but in conduct unbecoming a Predator-class enforcement officer. Jake testified at my hearing. He told the tribunal that without my assistance, first contact would have failed completely, Earth would have been denied entry to the galactic community, and the Hegemony would have continued to threaten civilian shipping for years to come. The charges were dropped. I received a commendation for innovative problem-solving and flexible interpretation of regulations under emergency conditions. I also received a new assignment, permanent liaison to Earth's technical consultation program, working directly with Jake Miller on maintenance issues throughout Council space. We still communicate by tapping on walls sometimes, though now it is more out of habit than necessity. And whenever Jake encounters a problem that seems impossible to solve, he always starts the same way. 3 taps on the nearest surface, which, as any Korath will tell you, means hello, let us figure out what is broken and fix it. And somehow, that approach has never failed us yet.